Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration web seminar, which is entitled How Schools Are Prioritizing Social Emotional Learning, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor, Go Guardian. Now, before we get started, I would like just to share a few housekeeping items with you all. For technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then type your message if you're having any technical issues, and I should get to you shortly. If you don't have computer speakers or if you prefer to listen privately, please dial the phone number and access code that I'll be posting in the chat window in a few moments, so look out for that. We will also be welcoming any questions you have today with the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. To submit a question, please use the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, and then send your questions to all panelists, which should be the default option. If you don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just look to the right side of your screen and then click on the expand triangle, which is directly in front of the panel name, to make sure you have access to it. Also, something important to note, if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who's registered and who is attending today will receive an email with a link to the slide as well as an archive recording. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to all of you today our speakers. We have Shannon Mcclintock Miller, who is the Innovation Director of Instructional Technology and Library Media at Van Meter Community School in Iowa. We have Stacy Morgan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Emergent Tree Education. Richard Cooper, who is the lead assistant principal at Pinkerton High School Central in Ohio, as well as Risa Bennett, who is the advocates lead at Go Guardian. Thank you all for joining us. You may now begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those introductions, Stephen, and welcome to my panelists. As Stephen said, my name is Risa Bennett. I'm the advocates lead here at Go Guardian, and I'm also a former educator. The questions that we're going to be discussing today are actual questions that have been posed to me and posed to my team from real educators. And so as we tackle these tough topics about SEL, I'm so excited to have the insights from this group of panelists today. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. And I should say this is a pair deck, so we would love you to join. We're going to have a little bit of interactivity throughout our discussion today and take a few polls via pair deck. So if you want to join the presentation and follow along on your own screens, you can access the link directly from the chat. One of our moderators is dropping a link in there. Or if you're familiar with the other way to get to a pair deck presentation, you can follow my screen here where it says go to joinpd.com and enter that 6-letter join code. Again, it's not mandatory, but if you want to engage in some of our polling throughout the conversation, we really hope that you will join the presentation that way. All right. For whatever reason, now my screen won't clear. Stephen, would you be able to clear the pair screen?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, once again, we're discussing how schools are prioritizing social emotional learning. We're going to jump right in with our first question, and we'll start at the top. How can we include SEL lessons in mandated timed curriculum? And so we'll start at a high level there as a follow-up, and if you want to get into more detail, panelists, how often should teachers be expected to incorporate SEL exercises into their daily schedules? Richard, would you mind kicking us off, please?
Sure. So at the high school level here in Ohio, we've implemented a couple of different programs. We've created a smart lab for our students to be able to go to for their social emotional well-being. It's a time where they can go and they can press pause. They can take some time to get their mind right and kind of refocus on things. We also have what we call it Tiger Time, since we're the Pinkerton High School Central Tigers. So it's Tiger Time, which is kind of our intervention and enrichment program. 20 minutes a day, every day at the beginning of the day. And during that time, we have some programs that we use to kind of talk about social emotional learning, just some brief overviews that teachers kind of touch base with students on one-on-one, small group setting, things of that nature, just to kind of get their day started off on the right footsteps. So that's kind of how we implement it into the curriculum. We also our teachers use Pear Deck throughout the day to do like the self check-ins that Pear Deck does when you first get into the program. We also use those for like social emotional exit tickets. And we do it probably about once every 2 weeks or so like that, just to kind of check in with our students and see where they're at and things.
All right. Thank you. Shannon, anything that you would like to include or your insights about how to include SEL in the mandated time curriculums and how often your district recommends they incorporate this into their schedules?
Yeah, well, we make, just SEL part of our daily work at Van Meter, and we're a preschool to 12th grade building. And so we think about all of our kids and, checking in with them and how they're doing through different activities that we do. We do a lot of things where we even bring down our high school kids, and we do activities on Fridays with our younger ones. And, checking in and watching them collaborate is just a good way for us, I think, as teachers, but also to really strengthen that social emotional learning within our school as they collaborate. And just as a librarian, having it be part of our daily, having resources available, having our library and our new STEAM lab available for the kids to be able to come to. And like, using Pear Deck for checking in, morning meeting times, when they leave the day. It's just so nice to just have that be this constant that we're, they know that we're thinking about them and that we're all in this together, especially this year.
Absolutely. I did have a follow-up question. You mentioned bringing the older kids down. Can you tell us briefly what role they play in this?
Yeah, so we do a lot of like kind of STEAM challenges. And so we see our older kids as mentors often to our younger ones. And so not only doing these STEM challenges together and having conversations, if maybe it's focused around a certain topic or maybe a theme or certain time of year celebration, but then just naturally having those relationships happen where there's mentorships both ways too. The little ones make you feel awful good if you're having kind of a crummy day.
I know that's true. That's really sweet. Stacy, you provide resources to educators and you've been an educator yourself. What kind of recommendations do you make when you're training educators on these topics?
Yeah, well, I think our first two panelists hit on a lot of them, talking about setting aside time for direct instruction, looking at those morning check-ins and those morning meetings are really important pieces. I think the main thing I might also contribute has to do with that second question when we're thinking about what time do we really set aside for students. And I think this is where thinking in your multi-tiered systems can be helpful. Certainly you want to have supports, instruction, morning meetings for all your kiddos, but there might be subsets of kiddos that need a little extra on top of that. So thinking, what else can we provide for those kids that have additional need, and how can we carve out time for them? I think this is places where really digging deeper into particular skills, providing more direct instruction, connecting back to what we've already taught to all kids, can be really helpful to make sure we're meeting the different needs of kids as they walk in our building.
Thank you so much, Stacy. All right, we're going to stop for just a quick poll based on this question. We want to hear from you and the audience. And if you did join the Pear Deck and have that on a separate browser window, you'll see a draggable on your screen. So there's a blue dot in the top right-hand corner. Why don't you let us know, does your school or district mandate dedicated time for SEL throughout the week? I'm going to go ahead and just show these responses coming in real time, if our internet catches up with us. Maybe it won't. Well, the good news is on my teacher dashboard in Pear Deck, I can see that people are responding, and I am hoping our Wi-Fi catches up to show you that other people. It's very split. I'll just narrate this myself. There we go. It's about 50-50 people who have something mandated versus those who don't. All right, thank you so much for weighing in, guests. On to our next question. So our next question, and again, these are not hypothetical questions, but ones that have actually come to us from real educators. This one is, how do we encourage parents and community members to help teach SEL at home? And I'll add on to that, to support the efforts that are happening in school. Shannon, will you lead off on this question?
Sure, I would love to. Well, as the librarian and just helping our school to as being, a resource for not only our kids and our teachers, but our families as well. Especially last year when they needed additional supports that were new to all of us, making sure that they have the resources available. If it is, sharing it with them, maybe in a choice board or having some kind of meeting, even on a Google Meet, but making sure that they have resources available, that they have good books and they have conversations. And even if we need to go a little bit deeper, having the support of our social worker, our guidance counselors as well, available to our kids. But we always want to make sure that we're listening and that we're supporting our parents, and community members in the best way too.
I love that. What I'm hearing you say is that the community needs the education and support just like the students do, if we want them all to be on the same page.
Oh yeah.
Stacy, tag in. Is there anything else that how you encourage parents and community to participate in SEL efforts with school?
Yeah, so I agree with Shannon. Providing the resources is really important. Sometimes people don't have the tools in their hands that they need in order to really solve the problem or support the students that they have in their home or that they're working with in the community. A tool we often recommend is the school creating some common vocabulary that homes and communities can use as well. We often call those our campus core values. Every campus can really establish what are the core values that are important to you. A really common one is be safe, be respectful, be responsible. As the school establishes that, we can connect all of our teaching back to those core values, even when we're acknowledging the behaviors we really want to see kids do, or even when we're having to correct some behaviors, connecting back to that common vocabulary becomes a real tool. And what we'll see as we'll start sending this common vocabulary, core values home in some of the conversations or documents that we send home is that parents will start using this language as well. We'll hear it out in the community, in the park, in the movie theater, and even bringing in parents and community members to help define, well, if we say being respectful is a core value in our campus, what does that mean? What does that look like from your lens, from your perspective? How do we define a word like respect, which is really abstract and really looks different to different people in different situations? So one of my favorite tools is that common vocabulary, or we call it core values, that can be used inside of school certainly, but can be spread outside of school to really connect everything we do, no matter what environment we're in.
Thank you, Stacy. That's an incredibly practical tip that I feel like people can take away from this. Richard, can you share with us any initiatives that are happening in your school or district to help bridge this gap between community and caregivers and the initiatives inside of school?
Yeah, so we started, going off of what Stacy was just talking about, we started a program called the R Factor here at Central. It's a program by a gentleman named Tim Kite that uses kind of that same thing. It's a common language. It's a common values of things. And it's very simplistic to help kids to understand really quickly on the fly. What's your response? What's your R? You have an event, you have a response, and you have an outcome. E plus R equals O. So when you have the event, how do you respond to that event? And that's one of the things that we've been really initiating here to help with kind of that social emotional learning, that social emotional balance, but also keeping that common language that we can use with our students, our community can use it. We started this program about 2 years ago and then COVID. And so we started training our staff with it. We're very detail oriented in how we train the staff on the program and got them on board with it. And then last year, it was supposed to be rolled out to our student body, parent meetings, community meetings. We even had stuff set up with our Chamber of Commerce to get the business owners in so they could start being trained in how the R factor works and stuff like that. So since they employ a lot of our high school kids, they can use that same language with them. So we are trying to really get the whole community involved with that aspect at the time.
That's incredibly inspiring. I love the connection even to the Chamber of Commerce, because it's true, our students, they spend time at school and they spend time at home, but there are myriad other places that they're spending their time as well. I just love hearing you say you're covering all those bases. In the chat, I would love to hear from you guys what kind of terms from our listeners, what kind of terms that you might be defining in your district to build this common language, or what ideas that you might have. Feel free to drop those in the chat as we move on to our next question. And again, our next question is the one I'm sure that we all want to have an answer to. How can social emotional learning be measured? I think we understand that even though it feels like it's something that is kind of squishy and warm and fuzzy, we do want to be able to measure the success of our initiatives. So Stacy, will you start us off? How can social emotional learning be measured?
Well, there's a lot of different ways it can be measured. I think one of the most important things to think about is moving away from just capturing a reduction of challenging behavior, and instead moving towards measuring, are we seeing the increase of skill acquisition, students using the skills we've taught? And that really helps us move into being able to measure small progress as students really form approximations, being able to use some of the skills in some environments and then more environments. Reaching back to what we talked about with common vocabulary, once that's established, it can also help us set up a measurement tool. So as we're seeing students engage in some of those behaviors we've defined, being safe, being respectful, being responsible, as we've defined it across classrooms and other situations in our campuses, we can start to account for how often are we seeing these behaviors and begin to quantify those. That pushes us into measuring the skills we want to see versus just capturing behaviors we don't want to see, which has been a common measurement tool in the past.
I love that. I think it's easy to fall into that habit of the focus on the negative versus the positive outcomes. Thanks for resetting our mindset on that. Let's see, I think Shannon up next. What are some ways that you are measuring social emotional learning in your district?
Well, I think by watching what our teachers and also our guidance counselors do, one thing is just even having like those check-ins using Pear Deck with their morning meetings. And I love how teachers can just get a quick little glimpse. And as Stacy said, focusing on the positive. We have a positive, we use a positive, not award, but a positive incentive that we want them. We want our kids to be happy. We want them to be, feel like they're part of our community. And I think just giving those little, quick checks, if it's in a small group setting, if it's in a large group setting, if it's one-on-one. And, being a librarian, a lot of times I can measure those kids that I am constantly seeing. And if I haven't seen them or having, a place that they can go, for me, that's the most important thing too, is just being able to check in with them that way as well.
That makes sense. Richard, how about in your district? How are you guys measuring SEL initiatives?
So I'm looking at the chat and I see that Lori stole my answer. We have a program called Panorama that we have been using to really start to get a sense of what our culture is like and how our students actually feel. It is a great tool to be able to measure students where they're at. It asks them specific questions. It's a survey. We give it to them at different times throughout the year just to kind of measure where we're at. So when we first did it, we thought we were thinking one direction and we actually were supposed to be going in another direction. So our sense of belonging in our district was lacking big time. And so that helped us to make a push towards getting kids more involved, making them feel more of a part of the building, more a part of the culture and such of that nature. It's led to a lot of other initiatives that have happened throughout, but Panorama is a great tool that measures all the sense of belonging. It measures the social emotional health of our students, how they feel, how they think their teachers see them, how they think their peers see them, how they see themselves. It's been a very powerful tool for us to use.
All right, one more time for our audience. Richard recommends Panorama for measuring your SEL initiatives. Okay, this was mentioned a little bit at the very top of the conversation, but I would love to dive into it a little deeper. What are the best ways for reaching a diverse set of social emotional needs for our diverse students? Shannon, I'll have you lead us off on this one. Actually, I think I might have lost Shannon. A little technical difficulty. Richard, can I have you tag in first on this one? What are the best ways to reach a diverse set of SEL needs for our diverse students?
So this one we've been using another program called School Connect, and it has a lot of different tools that we can use to reach our kids at different areas throughout their lives. Some of it is self-driven, some of it is self-paced, some of it is teacher-driven, teacher-paced. Some of it is small group setting, some of it is individual, one-on-one, whole classroom. So it hits kids in many different areas and in many different ways to kind of really help with their learning styles, help them understand what is my social emotional health, because they don't always understand it themselves. And so this program kind of helps guide people through that. And it's helped us also get buy-in with our staff, because it's not something else that they have to do. It's something that's already done for them, and they just kind of have to moderate and mediate and really kind of help guide the student. And so that's been a very positive for us there.
You highlighted an objection that I hear a lot from educators is we don't have time for one more thing. Like thinking about SEL is just something else that I have to add. So I really like that distinction, that we're not trying to set it up that way, that it is a part of the larger picture. Thank you for highlighting that.
Yes,
Stacy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it is definitely seen now as something that they just incorporate in. It's not one more thing because it's already done for them. So it's been a really good transition for us.
Well, I just want to applaud you for cultivating that culture in your district. I know that in my experience, that is really required from the top down leadership in order to set that tone. So good work on flipping that script in your district. Stacy, what insights do you have for us about the best way to reach diverse sets of social emotional needs?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. I think really making sure that all the voices on your campus are not just included, but really lifted up and heard is really critical to making sure whatever decisions you make on your campus about social emotional learning, that it really is addressing the needs of all students. One way we've done this on campuses before, particularly at secondary, but at every level, is through student focus groups. But what I think is important about focus groups is not just going to the groups that are kind of already there for you, easy to access, like student council already exists, let's go to their meeting and do a focus group there. This organization already exists, let's just go to their meeting that's already scheduled and talk to them. But instead being really intentional about pulling in students who may not be a part of a group that's officially organized in the campus, making sure that the groups are small enough that students feel comfortable talking, maybe even letting them self-select who's a part of their focus group so they feel comfortable sharing. That way you can make sure no matter what student is in the building that we've had the opportunity to hear their voice. I think that's one of the best ways is asking them, really listening. But I think the big point here is being really intentional about the voices you're bringing to the table and making sure that every student voice is really included in that conversation.
it seems, it might seem so obvious to say you need to be intentional about something, but truly, so many things can fall through the cracks. So I really appreciate you highlighting the need for representation. I also like the idea of having people self-select into those discussions. We might have a perception about where somebody falls or what they might think, but allowing them to really define that for themselves. I think that's really smart and insightful. Shannon, are you back yet? Looks like she's still having trouble connecting. All right, we're going to move on to our next question then. I think this is a tough puzzle that many of us are trying to solve right now. How do we help students who are not receptive to our attempts to connect? Stacy, I'll have you lead us off with your insights on this one.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts here. A lot connecting back to my experience as a teacher, especially early in my career. I think the first aha I had is don't assume that they're not receptive just because they don't display it in the ways you think they would if they were receptive to your connection, right? I had more than one experience where I heard from a parent way later on in the year of some conversation or some way that I had connected with their kid that kid had never shown me had really meant anything to them. So I think the first thing is don't assume you're not connecting. Keep reaching out. I think the second piece of advice I would have here, again, from my own experience, is don't personalize it. Don't make that lack of connection about you. Because the students aren't obligated to trust us or to connect with us on a certain timeline. It's our responsibility to reach out and connect with them. And it's their choice as to how quickly they come along with that. So we keep up our end, we keep reaching out, we keep doing the good practices we know that build relationships and build trust. And then we let the student take it from there without personalizing it and taking it as a reflection on my ability to connect. That'll lead us down the wrong path when it comes to continuing to reach out to that student.
Do you have any, I feel like that's incredibly important and incredibly difficult to do. Do you have any advice for how to not internalize it as a shortcoming of our own or something that we are responsible for totally fixing?
Yeah, so that's a really big question. I think a lot of just self-reflection. When something creates an emotional response in you, that's natural, that's a human response. But then think about, well, why is it that I'm feeling this way? Why is it that that student's response to me bothers me and makes me feel have this emotional response? So I think that's the first thing is being reflective. I think the second thing is probably a longer answer, but I'll just touch on it here. I think remembering that social and emotional learning is not only about the connection of the student and the teacher, right? That's a piece of it. Building relationships and building connections is really important. There's a lot of other pieces there. Building skills, which can be independent of my relationship with that student. I just want them to build the skills to navigate their own lives and become independent and use those skills within their circle and their community. And I think another piece is remembering that I'm not their only teacher, that just because they don't connect with me, they might connect with someone else, just like I connect with some people quicker and easier than other people. So it's a team effort when it comes to connecting with kids. Reach out to those other teachers that work with them, ask them what's working for them. That may not work for you, but just knowing that that student is connecting somewhere can sometimes release kind of the pressure and burden of you having to be the person that makes that ultimate connection.
Oh man, there's a lot of wisdom to unpack there. I'm glad we're recording this so people can go back and re-listen. There's a ton of good insight in there. Thanks, Stacy. And Richard, I'll kick it over to you now. How do you recommend that we help students who are not receptive to our attempts to connect?
Can I just say ditto? And I mean, that was very good. I mean, that's a lot of exactly what we're talking about there. You never know when you're making that connection. You may never know. Sometimes it's just you're planting the seed, and that seed will cultivate on its own. So don't take it personally. That's where we talk about when we're talking about with the R Factor program, your event plus your response, control your response to it. It's not just you. It's not all about you. You're doing the thing for the student, helping them to grow. Don't take it personally because they might be acting out. They're not acting out necessarily at you. It might be acting out at something else that happened and you just happen to be the brunt of it that day. So don't take it personally. I always say it's hard to do because education is such an emotionally personal thing, and it really shouldn't be, but it is. So because we really take on our kids all the time, but always like Stacy had said, we're always reaching out to our kids. We're always trying to reach to them, plant those little seeds. It may work, it may not work. You may never know it works, but it's worth doing it no matter what. So.
Oh, I feel like we could end it right there, and plenty to chew on. That's such good insight. And you're right, it is a long game. I think those of us who have been in education a long time know that there are probably seeds you plant, you never know just how much they flourish later. Just keep on fighting that good fight. Thank you so much for that insight, both of you. That was lots, like I said, lots to chew on there. All right, here's our next question. And this is especially important for our leadership in the room. How do we encourage all teachers to see the value in SEL or social emotional learning, and how do we guide them towards a more empathetic approach to their students? Richard, I'll let you lead off on this one.
For us, it's training. The teachers need to know what to do in these situations. I mean, you know, when I went to college, when I graduated in an education degree, this was not something that we talked about. It was not part of our curriculum. It was not part of any of our pedagogy classes or anything of that nature. So how do we make that happen? How do we get that? And that's where we have discovered training our teachers, giving them the resources, supporting them, knowing that they're not alone in it. That we're not just saying, here's this new thing, go do it. And we're going to walk with them and kind of help guide them along the way. It has really made the impact for us. You still have some of those who are, you know, we're in our ways. This is how we always do things. This is how we roll. I don't necessarily need this in my life. But you just keep working with them, and you just keep saying just one thing. Just try one thing with your students. Just try this little piece here. Just try this little piece there. But you know, often just making them comfortable with the content, making them comfortable with the idea of just looking at a kid and actually going, hey, you okay today? How's it going? And really asking the question and really listening to the student, just making them comfortable with that idea. They don't have to have all the answers. They don't have to have all the you know, the direction. Oh, well, you need this, this, and this, and here, let me fix all your problems right here, right now. But just planting those little seeds and making them understand that it's just that initial contact that can mean the world to that kid, and then guide them from there. That's kind of how we've approached it, giving them the training that they needed, supporting them in any way that we can to help them understand that it's not scary. Just be human.
Just be human. It's great advice. Richard, I see Stacy and I just nodding along, agreeing with everything. Stacy, what can you add to that response? How do we encourage all teachers to see the value in SEL and bring a more empathetic approach to students?
Yeah, well, I wholeheartedly agree with Richard that the first thing is recognizing teachers aren't necessarily trained to do these pieces. And there's a piece of maybe fear, feeling unprepared to do what I'm asked to do. That's important for us as campus or district leadership to own and really support, giving teachers the confidence and the competence to really do these things in their classroom. One of the things we often link back to frequently is just first having conversations about each teacher's beliefs or mindsets when it comes to behavior, social, emotional learning. Because what we found is on every campus, teachers come with their own kind of previous mindsets about what changes behavior, how we should address social emotional learning, and really pulling in those beliefs to a common belief system across our entire campus can be helpful. We often anchor to just the phrase, at our campus, we take an instructional approach to behavior. So everything we do, whether it's teaching, whether it's acknowledging, reinforcing, whether it's correcting behavior, that it's all about, but what is the underlying skill that we're hoping the student's learning even from correcting behavior? So helping teachers really anchor back to in our initial training, but also in our follow-up conversations, which it takes many. I think Richard spoke to this too, that a single training doesn't, shift all your practices. It's that ongoing, try this one thing, have another conversation and another conversation. And that common foundational mindset, here's what we believe at our campus, can really help anchor those conversations. Keep in mind, teachers already believe in the power of good instruction. I mean, that's our magic wand, right? We know how to teach. We have instructional strategies falling out of our pockets. We don't always apply them in social, emotional, and behavioral realm. But if we're linking on to what we already know and believe works, good instruction, and in every conversation about social, emotional learning, try to connect back to that belief that teachers already deeply understand, that can really help accelerate our movement in giving teachers the confidence to really put these things in place. And like I said earlier, the confidence, feeling like, oh yeah, I do know how to do this. I just need to apply it to social emotional learning. Great. So that's we always say instructional approach to behavior, instructional approach to social emotional learning, kind of as an anchoring phrase.
Well, I'm watching the chat, and you guys are getting a lot of agreement. Really feel like you're hitting home with people. So thank you guys for your insights on that one. Now I'm going to flip the question a little bit. So we're talking about we want teachers to approach all their students with empathy, but on the other hand, sometimes teachers might err too far on the side of empathy to the point where perhaps they are actually enabling negative behavior. Stacy, how do you mitigate the opposite side of this approach?
Yeah, so I think this is such an important question too, because I think there's a perception sometimes in social emotional behavioral world that it's just focus on the positive and pretend like the other stuff isn't happening. That's certainly not the case, right? We need to correct behavior, challenging behavior when it happens, when kids aren't using their social emotional skills that we've taught them. We need to be able to correct them. But a couple of things we've already talked about really allow us to do that. The first is common vocabulary across the campus. If we've established, here's our core values, we believe in being safe, respectful, responsible, or whatever your campus anchors to, and we've defined and taught that, here's what it looks like to be respectful in a professional environment versus a social environment versus on technology or transportation, then we can connect. But we didn't show that core value. And here's how not showing that core value affected you and everyone else. That anchoring vocabulary, that pre-teaching allows us to continue to correct in an instructional way, right? Anchoring back to instructional approach to behavior. This isn't just about doling out consequences and disciplinary actions that we hope are aversive enough to make you not want to misbehave again. It's not about that. What correcting behavior is about reteaching and reestablishing those social, emotional, and behavioral skills that are really important to our community. So that common vocabulary, that anchoring back to that belief about instructional approach can be some of our most effective tools in everything we do with behavior, but become particularly important in keeping us from erring on that punitive, exclusionary side when it comes to correcting behaviors, and keep us on the instructional approach, even when we see some behaviors that are challenging or impactful to our learning environment.
This time it's my turn to say, Richard is nodding along in agreement. Richard, what do you want to agree with or add on to wrap up this question?
Yeah, I can, every time that Stacy goes, I can just say ditto and be done. I mean, she's hitting it all, out of the park. It's a great job. But because I just reinforce everything that she said. I mean, training again, we wanted to make sure we trained our staff to know that, here's where you're going with it. There's that line. We don't want to cross that line. You don't want to make it just so you're enabling them to do things. Don't let them have excuses for what their behavior is. Hold them accountable to it, but also know that there's an underlying cause, and we're trying to figure out and fix that underlying cause. We're not trying to punish and be punitive about everything all the time. We want to find out what is going on, what is making you act this way, what is making this happen, and how do we help you cope with that? How do we help you fix that piece? That's the biggest piece of it right there that we need just to watch out for, and again, not make it personal, not take it on all ourselves, and not make it our problem, but work together to really solve what the individual student is feeling.
Excellent. I'll just leave it at that. All right, we have just a couple questions left, and then we'll get to some Q&A. But before we get to the Q&A, one educator asked, as administrators, how can we encourage teachers to take care of themselves so that they can be socially and emotionally responsive to their students? Richard, would you like to lead us off on this one?
So we created the social emotional lab for our students, which we call our Press Pause Lab, that has a place where they can go and they can get their mind right and really kind of focus in on things. There's coloring books, there's exercise bikes, there's somebody to talk to if they want to. We have a program called Heart Smart where they can sit down and they can really measure their anxiety levels and can kind of guide themselves out. It's a little clip that clips onto their earlobe, and they just do little activities on the computer, like that slow your breathing down. And the more you slow your breathing down and your heart rate down, then you see the different colors appear on the screen and stuff like that. And so it really kind of helps guide them on how to slow themselves down with that. We created that for our students last year. This year we did the exact same thing for our staff, and we created a lab for our staff that they can go to at times to calm down. We've been asked multiple times, and no, we were not able to put in the margarita machine, but we did get some areas where they could go up. We have a Wii Fit up there. They have a few different things that are up there. There's an exercise bike that has a desk on it that they can actually sit and do some work while they're exercising. They can just walk themselves off. We have a yoga studio area in the room as well. So lots of different things where they can just kind of go and they can press pause. They can get their mind right, because the same things that our students go through, our teachers go through. So we really want to support them, because if their cup is empty, they can't fill somebody else's cup. So we're going to continue to really help them get that way and lead and help them to lead our students in that way as well.
Well, first of all, I would like to come work at your school. And second of all, I feel like we've come a long way from like the smoky, burnt coffee teachers' lounges of, the mid 20th century. So Stacy, anything that you would like to add to that? How do we encourage teachers to take care of themselves and make sure their cups are filled up?
Yes, so I was going to say the same thing, Risa, that I want to go work for Richard, because your school sounds awesome. And I love that idea. Yeah, my thoughts are here, maybe somewhat changing the question. Instead of how can we encourage teachers to take care of themselves, I think the real requirement for us as school leaders is how can we design systems that nurture the social emotional health of our teachers. And I think there is a difference there. I'm going to steal from one of our district partners and something he said on a webinar that he was on, a superintendent here in Texas at East Central ISD. His name is Roland Toscano. He said, for too long, we've relied on the individual heroic acts of teachers. And not that those aren't great, right? We see them on social media all the time. We should celebrate teachers who really go above and beyond, who really impact the lives of students in a way that's really outside of their job description. But on the other hand, if we're relying on that to be our social emotional supports, hoping that teachers will reach into the lives of kids when our systems aren't really designed to support that, that's what starts to take a toll on the social emotional health of our teachers. So I think the first thing that becomes really important is some of the things we've already talked about. How are we designing time for teachers to plan, to deliver instruction that really improves outcomes for students? How are we giving them the resources and the training they need to feel like I'm prepared to do this in my classroom? I can be successful. I mean, the thing that really nourishes teachers the most in some ways is seeing the impact of the things they're doing in their classroom. And when their students are making progress, when their students are connecting with them, when their students are really displaying some of these social emotional skills, creating a community in their classroom, suddenly I do feel healthy and built up and filled up. So my biggest takeaway there is, some of the stuff that we've heard from Richard doing in his campus, making sure that we're putting in the effort to design systems where teachers can be successful, they have the tools they need. That's one of the best things we can do to help teachers really take care of their own social emotional health.
Wow, so much to think about. You guys have shared just incredible insight. I'm looking in the chat. I'm looking at some of the questions that we have coming up for Q&A, and I just, man, so much to learn, so much to grow. But the way you both are talking about this, it doesn't make it seem quite so overwhelming as I think sometimes it may seem when people first start thinking about how they bring SEL into their schools or districts. I'm going to take a quick poll in the Pear Deck. So if you're one of the participants who joined the Pear Deck, I want to ask you to let us know how equipped do you feel to support staff and students' SEL needs at this moment? The yes should be, I feel very equipped, and the no should be not very. That's how you should interpret the yes and no. Yes, I feel equipped. No, I don't feel equipped. And I'm going to go ahead and show responses here. Ooh, our internet is going faster. Again, if you join the Pear Deck, you can drag that blue dot to let us know whether or not you feel equipped to support staff and students' SEL needs. Well, the good news is there's only a couple of outright no people who are maybe 3, but it is more of a minority, so that's good news. But it looks like there's a lot of us who fall in the middle. Like maybe we're not completely out to dry, but we're nowhere near where we want to be. So if you said that you are not equipped or that you're sort of medium equipped, I would love you to drop some questions in the Q&A that perhaps our panelists can help support you and make you feel more equipped or point you in the right direction. And again, just driving, if you have questions you want to throw into the Q&A, we're going to get to that in just a moment. Before we do, I'm going to ask, while you guys are typing in your questions, I'm going to ask our panelists just a final lightning round question here. What is one thing that you hope audiences take away from today's conversation? And I'll let you guys decide who wants to go first if something is immediately top of mind.
So I guess I would say it's not as hard as it seems, but it is important. For those people who feel, no, I'm not well equipped to do this, I don't blame you. I mean, we've been working on this in our district and in our school for about 2 to 3 years now, really trying to focus in on it. And I still don't feel fully equipped to be able to do it well. We have a lot of things that we're working on, and it's a constant improvement process. It's constantly changing and morphing as our society changes and morphs, as our culture changes and morphs. So don't be afraid of it. Just because I don't feel well equipped, don't be afraid to try, because you will see great returns just from starting it out.
Excellent. Stacy, what is one thing that you hope the audience takes away from the conversation today?
Yeah, so it's hard to narrow down, but I think the one thing that always feels important to me is just recognizing that effective social emotional learning isn't an individual effort. It's not ever on the shoulders of a single person. that it really takes systemic design, thinking, planning, being intentional about the identification, the instruction, and the intervention in this area. So putting the efforts there really have this kind of exponential impact when it comes to seeing improved outcomes for students in this area.
Thank you both so much for those insights. I know that there's enough here to probably re-listen to this whole conversation and take notes. In the meantime, it looks like people have taken away great nuggets, and we have a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of our audience questions with our remaining few minutes here. The first one is, how involved should we expect parents or guardians to be involved in the process when that setting may be very unstructured? So how involved should we expect caregivers to be in social emotional instruction, especially when there's not a lot of structure built for that?
Well, I can jump in there with what I think the question is asking. I think you just see them as two separate things. Not that they're separate, they're connected, but we can move forward in the school environment with social emotional learning regardless the involvement of parents. The reason I say that is because if we can't get that right away, we can still do a lot just in our classrooms and just in our campuses. That being said, as much as we can reach out, bringing in those voices when we're planning our campus processes really plants the seeds and starts the conversation. Getting those resources out over time, I think, becomes important too. So I think it's less about how much we expect. I think we get started, we do our piece, we continue to bring parents in, and we cultivate that over time, but we don't let that stop our efforts if we're not quite where we want to be with that parental involvement just yet.
Thank you so much. Richard, any additional insight you want to share with this person about involving guardians and caregivers?
Yeah, it's, you know, at the high school level, I don't know if you know this or not, but it's kind of hard to get parent involvement at the high school level in anything, let alone when we're talking something like this. Because one of the things that we have found in our social emotional labs and talking with some of our students, you know, Stacy's right, we can do it in the building and really work with those individual kids. But, you know, especially nowadays when we're seeing kids who are struggling with identity issues and who they are as people and who they are in general, and then we get the parents who don't accept anything of any of the choices and decisions that they're making in their lives. So we try to work with the parents, at least talk with them and say, hey, this is going on. We are, you know, working with your child or talking with them about different things. But there are times when there is no parent involvement because we just really can't get it, and we really can't have those conversations with the parents. So Stacy's right. We do what we can in the classrooms. We do what we can in the building. If we get the parent involvement, great, but we don't rely on that piece and we don't expect it to be there. So.
Thank you guys so much. Our next question from the audience is, how can one get equipped? How can an individual teacher get trained if there's no such system in place for them?
Well, I think there's a lot of routes to that, right? Like, you know, you can always take the old-fashioned route and just reading. There's tons of research and journal articles out there that's available. I don't think there's anything to replace, though, good training and mentorship. I think something we've seen come out of COVID, we certainly in our organization and Emergent Tree have begun taking advantage of, is online courses that are available. Webinars like this one, attending conferences. There's a bunch of different conferences out there, some national, some statewide, that really address just social emotional learning or behavioral sciences. Many of those you used to have to fly to. It's still great to do that. They're always in fun locations around the nation, but a lot of them have virtual options now. If your campus or district isn't offering this kind of training, then those are some routes that you can seek it out yourself. That being said, I do think it is it accelerates learning when that training can be done campus-wide, because it allows for conversations. And as you implement kind of ongoing support and coaching, either from the organization that's training you or from your peers and your leadership on your campus. So, you know, number one would be advocate for this in your school. If you are a school leader, bring in some sort of organization that really has expertise not only in the content, but how to really design it and roll it out for teachers. And if that's not, then consider some of these other options that may put some more on your shoulders to seek out the learning. But it's out there if it's an interest of you to really dig in a variety of places.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Richard, any other specific recommendations about how an individual teacher can get equipped to do this individually?
No, I think that she pretty much covered all that. The other piece is if you're trying to get buy-in from lots of people, in your building and trying to get all that training going, sometimes just start small. Just find those go-getters that are ready to go and grab them and have them come with you to get it rolling. You know, again, planting the seed. The little seed can be planted even in our administration, even in the higher ups above us, even in whoever it is that needs it. Just grab a few people who are go-getters to go to these type of things, go to these type of webinars, go to the type of training, sit in and listen to different things. And that will get the ball rolling, because people will start to see, well, what are you doing that's making things so good? And then it'll just spread like wildfire from there. So.
You actually had great foresight. Somebody actually asked, how do we persuade the higher ups to go this route to get the SEL training? Is there anything, now that you know that's another specific question, anything you want to add to your response to influence up?
Yeah, so the influence up in our area was just that it took convincing a couple of, like, the assistant superintendents and a couple of people at the district office to say, hey, come with me to this, because I've sat in on this. I think it's great. I think it's something that we are really missing and we really need. And it took me basically dragging and kicking and screaming and pulling them to one of these sessions to sit in and go to. And then once they got it, once they heard it, once they saw the benefit of what it could do for our student body and do for our culture of our not just the building, but the district as a whole, that's when they started to buy into it and say, okay, this is something we need to pursue.
Got it. Best of luck to you if you are out there trying to influence up. You are fighting the good fight. All right, we just have one more question from the Q&A that we have time for. And so, Stacy, I'll ask you to lead off on this one. And that the question is, in expanded learning program, it's difficult to find the time to train frontline staff in SEL. Are there quick fixes that are best for this kind of situation?
So first, I want to put out there that expanded learning program is not a term I'm familiar with in Texas, so I'm not exactly sure what that's referring to. But if we talk about just how can we find quick fixes for putting social emotional learning into the classroom when there's not a lot of time to do that, some of the strategies we talked about earlier, just integrating little bits of time, a morning meeting that's 5 minutes a day, where you can kind of integrate some of this self-reflection, having kids think about their own behavior, their own learning, can be really helpful. So that question's hard because there's not a quick fix. There are little pieces you can do to make an impact. But I agree with what Richard said earlier. Those little pieces are really intended to spark a flame, because what's impactful is the bigger flame. But I don't know that I would call them quick fixes, but I think I would call them impactful things that can start the process rolling into some of the other pieces that we talked about.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, thank you to our panelists. This has been an incredible discussion. We are out of time, so I just want to make sure we have a couple last thoughts here. So here are just a few social emotional learning resources that we can recommend that Pear Deck can offer. Again, if you join the Pear Deck, you can access all these links really easily. And then again, here's just a few more resources that Pear Deck can provide to you. And then also Shannon Miller, who did have to drop off early, she has a collection of resources as well. Stephen, are there any final words you want to say before we wrap this up today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first off, I'd just like to say, thank you all for your time and for your sharing your insights today. And if you did submit a question and we didn't get to it today, I'm sure that our friends at GoGuardian will be willing to get back to your questions individually after today's webinar. And speaking of our audience, I would also like to thank our attendees for joining us today. For those who enjoyed it, there are many more upcoming webinars like this one that are provided by District Administration, which is the leader in editorial cover of news, trends, as well as current issues in K through 12. Our wide range of readers subscribe for free to DA, and they stay up to date with us through our print magazine. Also, for those of you who would like to watch this web seminar again, or maybe for those of you who believe that the solutions provided in this web seminar would be helpful to your colleagues, you'll be pleased to know that there will be an archive recording of this webinar, which you can see at the URL on your screen right here. And you can also expect to receive an email from our team at DA at some point tomorrow, which will include a link to all the slides as well as the on-demand video. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks to everyone and have a great fall semester, you guys. Take care, be well, and stay safe, everyone.